Candidates, could we ask you to come up and sit at the table here so we can test your microphones? Thank you.
Good evening. Is it working?
Put it close to your-
Oh, a little, okay, that's better. I'm Jean Beck. I'm president of NAMI Yamhill County. Before we begin, I wanted to note that next week, October 7th to 13th, is Mental Illness Awareness Week. We're delighted to have you all here for our candidates forum tonight. I'm pleased to welcome all of the candidates this evening and thank them for their willingness to come here and share their thoughts about their candidacy. Finally, I want to express our appreciation for their volunteerism and time-consuming commitment to run for and serve in public office. As you may know, NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, is America's largest grassroots mental health organization whose mission is to improve the quality of life of individuals living with mental illness and of their families and friends through support, education, and advocacy. NAMI Yamhill County is one of 15 affiliates in the state of Oregon and one of 1,100 in the country. We hold educational events, weekly support groups, and classes to help individuals and families understand better how to live with mental illness, begin the process of recovery, and sustain wellness. Importantly, we work to influence and improve state and local health care and government systems as they relate to individuals and families affected by mental illness. Finally, there's a few housekeeping items we need to mention. The exit doors are to my left and in the back corner of the room. Coffee and cookies are available along the back wall. Help yourselves at any time. Restrooms are outside or found outside the exit door at the back of the room. If you have a question...
The restrooms are outside.
Outside might get you arrested.
Outside the exit door, sorry. Oh, well. If you have a question you'd like to ask, there are cards on the table, and if you would write it down and give it to Pauline, that would be fantastic. So I want to introduce our moderator for tonight, Ted Urton.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you. Thanks, Jean.
Sorry.
Great. Well, welcome, everyone. This is about our fifth.
Ask them to silence their cell phones, please.
Oh, please silence your cell phones if you have them here. Thank you. This is about our fifth NAMI Candidates Forum. They seem to be growing in size, every one that we hold. So I just want to thank all the candidates for coming tonight. I know it's a tremendous amount of extra time for you, but you're providing us all with a great public service with your commitment to run for public office. So this is how it's going to work. I have 6 or 7 questions here. Some will be directed to the entire group, others to either representatives or judicial candidates, and you'll have 2 minutes to answer the question, okay? And please adhere to the time frame. David here will be the timer, and we'll move through these. Once we've completed the formal questions, we'll take the cards on which the questions from the audience were written. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's start off.
Just a second. We got the music turned off outside, but we can shut the doors if it's too loud, but it's going to get really hot in here.
Okay. Alrighty, we're going to keep the doors open as long as the traffic noise is down. We got that beautiful music outside the building turned down. So, okay, what we're going to do, our first question is, and we'll start with David, and we'll just go right down the road, 2 minutes. Name yourself, name what you're running for, tell us a little bit about yourself, and most of all, why you think you're the best person running for your position. Go for it, David.
They told me not to lean into this because it makes it look like I'm selling insurance, and I'm trying not to do that. My name's Dave McCall, by the way. I go by Dave. I've lived in Kaiser for 20 years. I've been recently retired, went back to school, went to Western Oregon University, had a great time there. One of the reasons why I think I'm a better candidate than my opponent is my candidacy, my campaign is about inclusion and human dignity. And that includes everybody. we all have a certain right to a basic human dignity. Now, when it comes to mental health, I will tell you right now, I myself have been afflicted with anxiety. Now, I know it's not as serious as perhaps schizophrenia, but it was something that I did get treatment for. I had counseling, and I was lucky. It was at Western Oregon University. A lot of people can't even get that minimal kind of service. Just recently, our U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley is working on a bill through Congress that'll help fund for counseling and mental services in all of our public schools. So that's something that I would also support. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Ken Moore. I'm running for House District 24. I've lived on the same country road for 38 years, where I built a house out of the trees that were standing on the house site. My kids all graduated from Yamhill Carleton High School. I love this community. I give my heart to it, and I continue to do that. I'm running because you know Ron, know that he is a very nice guy, and he has I would call a very moderate persona, but his voting is not moderate. So I'm running to offer progressive and moderate voters a choice. I'm standing strong for reining in corporate power. I think that is choking the legislature. The money that's got into politics is part of our revenue problem. I am very strong about moving forward in addressing our homeless issue. I think the state has not done near well enough, and I have some great ideas about that, and I hope to be able to have a question about that tonight. Another issue is our education. In conversations with Mary Alice, she's indicated to me that her priorities are pre-K. It's time for that. It's time to help those kids that are coming into school not ready to learn, to be socialized, and to get that head start. That's one of her priorities. She's, of course, is concerned about revenue, and I hope we get a question about that tonight. I want to talk about what we can do to support our schools. And I'll just leave it at that. There's other issues that I'm excited to make a difference on, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Ron? If we could, we would ask that you just hold your applause. So thank you very much.
So
Ron?
thank you. Yes, my name is Ron Noble. I'm currently your state representative and absolutely am honored to be in this position. I've spent the last 12, 13 years in Yamhill County, but grew up not too far away in Polk County. So I've spent well, almost half a century here in the Valley. Raised my 4 kids, 2 who went to McMinnville High School, 1 at Linfield and 1 at George Fox. So we're still okay. I won't yell as much. I'll use this. How's that? Yeah. So I'm concerned. I've had a great opportunity to work across the aisle, and Ken's right. At one side, people call me conservative, but I had a Republican call me progressive not too long ago, so I might be hitting the sweet spot. I don't know. I've had the opportunity to work across the aisle to put forth a bill to look at transparency in pharmaceutical pricing, which impacts all of us. I've had a chance to work across the aisle to pass Senate Bill 231, which deals specifically with mental health issues in colleges and high schools. And I'm looking forward to being able to do more of that. We have some issues. We have homelessness, we have affordable housing, we have health care, and not just traditional health care, but mental health and how that fits into health care with our Oregon Health Authority. We have issues with economic growth and development. We've started on a path. We need to continue to build more jobs and have more opportunities for people. We have issues regarding our environment. We need to take care of the wonderful natural resources that we have, and that's going to be another topic we're going to deal with. And it's going to take a bipartisan solution. It's going to take somebody willing to work across the aisle to try to understand how people view the same problem so that we can come to common ground and provide a solution. That's what I've done, and that's what I commit to doing for you again.
Thank you. Jennifer Chapman?
My name is Jennifer Chapman, and I am running for Yamhill County Circuit Court Judge. I am older than I look. I have been I always start with that. I have lived in this community for a very long time. I'm raising my 4 boys in this community. This community means everything to me. And I believe that I have something special that I can offer, and that's why I decided to run for this position. Right now we have 4 amazing judges on the bench, but we only have 4 of them. 3 of them are former prosecutors, so they've got that criminal experience covered. I think there's value in having a judge that has some diversity of experience. Not only do I have experience with things like child support, domestic relations cases, juvenile dependency, contract disputes, business disputes, tax issues. I could go on civil commitment issues. I have a lot of that diverse experience in the type of work that I've done. And I also have experience arguing in almost every circuit court in this state, in the Oregon Bankruptcy Court, in the Oregon Court of Appeals, and the Oregon Supreme Court. I think that that is a unique set of experiences that will serve our community well. And I think that we owe it to our everyday citizens who are not appearing before court on a regular basis because they're crime victims or because they're criminals, but they're appearing before court because they need to adopt a baby, or they have a business dispute, they have a landlord dispute, they're small businesses with disputes. I think we owe it to the community to tell our businesses and our everyday people that they matter too, and that the courts are there for their issues as well. And so that's why I'm hoping at the end of this you guys will vote Jennifer Chapman.
Liesl?
Thank you. I'm Liesl Miller, running for Circuit Court Judge. So I grew up on a grass seed farm outside of Silverton, so I'm not originally from Yamhill County, but I'm from Marion County, not too far away. And I went to undergraduate school at Oregon State University, majoring in agricultural and resource economics. So agriculture is near and dear to my heart. I got my law degree at Lewis and Clark, and I've been an attorney for 25 years. So I think that's one thing that I offer is my length of experience as well as my breadth. I've practiced civil law for several years, but for the last 15 years, I've been working for Yamhill County, working for all of you as a deputy district attorney. And in that position, what I have specialized in are child abuse cases. So that's something that is also very close to me, is advocating for children in court. What I bring to the bench is that length of experience, but also I've done a lot of trials in this county. I've tried more than 100 cases in this county alone, in addition to trials in other counties as well. And this is for a trial judge position. So I think it's very important that the next judge has experience doing trials and doing jury trials and knowing how to conduct those. I think it's important to have not just civil experience, but also criminal experience. In Yamhill County, the percentages of cases that are filed every year are weighted toward criminal cases. The number of filings are over 60% for the last 3 years that have been criminal cases compared to civil cases. And the judges spend a majority of their time doing criminal cases as well. The criminal docket is a separate docket all on its own. Most of the trials that happen in this county also are criminal cases. So those are all the reasons why I would ask you to vote for me. Thank you.
Stan?
Yes. My name is Stan Primozic. I am currently a Yamhill County Commissioner, and want to tell you, I appreciate the fact that you let me do this because it's the most energizing part of the career I've ever had. It's my 5th career. I've flunked retirement twice, and I think I've got the kind of background that makes me perfectly suited to the myriad of things that we deal with, issues that come up in Yamhill County. I was in the Navy, spent 64, 65, and 66 in Vietnam. So I have that experience, which I'm glad I had it. I never want to repeat it. I spent 10 years in district management with J.C. Penney Company after having gone to school after I got out of the Navy and getting some business education. Then I left the J.C. Penney Company and bought a men's clothing store. Bought the ice cream parlor next door to the clothing store and had to sell the clothing store to try and keep the ice cream parlor running. It didn't work. I lost everything and got my second business education. From there, I went to work for the Prudential and spent 35 years in financial planning. And I have a myriad of clients in this area. So I've got a very diverse background. But along with that, I call myself a civic entrepreneur. I spent 24 years on the McMinnville School Board. It's an experience that everybody should have, and Barbara can attest to that. There are so many issues that come up that are somewhat similar to what we deal with at the county. But I spent 4 years on the, am I done already? Well, you'll just have to come back for part 2.
Danny?
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Danny Jaffer, and I am running for House District 23. I'm sure there are some House District 23 members out there. I can spot a couple of them, but thank you for the show of hands. So I grew up south of here, down in the Monmouth Independence area, and went to Central High School. I'm the son of teachers. My dad taught for over 30 years at what's now Western Oregon University, used to be Oregon College of Education. Graduated from Oregon State University, joined the Navy after I graduated, became a naval aviator, spent 8 years on active duty, moved back to the area with my family in the early 90s, went to law school at University of Oregon. About 18 months after I finished law school, I got recalled to active duty and ended up staying on active duty until I retired in 2010. From there, I've run for a couple of offices, or run for the same office twice, I should say. Polk County Commissioner, lost the first time by about 1,800 votes. Gave it a go in 2014 and lost by 11 votes to the same candidate, or to the incumbent. I'm a big believer in education, and I believe that we need to focus on education if we want to solve some of the other issues that are important, like health care, environmental protection, clean air and clean water for our farms and our forests and our vineyards and all those things that are important to us, our nice green open spaces that we have. I'm also very concerned about veterans issues, as you might imagine, and I believe in hard work. I believe in doing the job. I want this job so that I can get in and do it. I don't think that our current representative has represented us very well. You might look to a couple of ballot measures you don't like and find his name on them. And you'll hear more about me later.
Thank you, all candidates. Here is our first question. It'll be asked of all of you, and we'll start again with Danny down on this side of the table. Do you have or know of a family member who suffers from a mental illness and has had interaction with our crime law system? Has it caused you to think differently about punishment versus treatment?
Well, I don't have an experience with a family member who has had a mental illness and been involved in our criminal law element. I have experience with folks who have suffered from mental illness, and the thing that I have seen, and I've lost a couple of friends, is that outreach is the biggest issue. And having folks know that there is a place to contact someone and get hold of somebody, and for folks to be available. What I've learned personally is that I need to listen better, and I need to be more available for those folks who have suffered something traumatic that requires them to reach out for help. And like I said, I've lost a couple of friends who were suffering from mental illness that they just couldn't get the help they needed for one reason or another. But in terms of how I feel about how that affects our criminal justice system too, I would say that we need to put more emphasis on treatment rather than just reining people in off the street.
Thank you. Stan, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm familiar with the question, unfortunately. I have 7 children and my 18th grandchild on the way. All 7 of my children graduated from McMinnville High School, but I have a daughter who spent 18 years in addiction, was a frequent flyer to Yamhill County Jail, took a year and a half in prison before she got clean. So I'm very familiar with someone who is struggling with addiction, which is very similar to mental health conditions because you're not in your right mind in that instance. She's a beautiful child. When she was 3 years old, if you asked her what her name was, she'd say, "Daddy's precious girl." That's all she ever heard. Today, she has been working in a rehab center for over 5 years. She just got her associate's degree and is doing fantastic and has 3 of my grandchildren. So yes, I know that it does happen to families because it did to ours, but I know that it can be overcome, and she has, and I'm very proud of her. And I'm very grateful to all the people who stepped up and assisted in getting her to where she is today.
Thank you. Casey, we're asking this question. Just identify yourself and the position you're running for.
Casey Kula, and I'm running for Yamhill County Commissioner, position number 1.
Okay, thank you. The question is, do you have or know of a family member who suffers from a mental illness and has had interaction with our crime law system? Has it caused you to think differently about punishment versus treatment?
Thank you, Ted, for the question. I actually, what I have is that the pastor the church that I went to and I was raised in, growing up, he was a great mentor to us. He married my wife and I. He was the presiding pastor, and we were raised in a church that did not believe that mental illness was that it existed, that anything that they had was a moral failing, and so I unfortunately got to watch him as a young person suffer from mental illness and not have anywhere to turn, and eventually he died by suicide just about a year ago, and his church was so heartbroken that they didn't know whether they would even have a service because they didn't know how to talk about it even. They didn't know how to talk about somebody in their midst who needed help and didn't even know where to go. And so I apologize that it's not caught up in the criminal justice system and that it's not a family member. There was a person who was very dear to me. And the lesson has really been learned by me is to make it clear, especially to faith communities, that mental illness is something we need to work on and we need to deal with, rather than being something that is prescribed by religion. So, thank you for that.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like the question read again?
No, I remember it.
Oh, and I apologize that I came late. I have a farm and it has my commitment until 6:30 every Thursday.
Put $5 in the bank.
Happily. Thank you for your understanding.
So I fortunately do not have a family member that has a mental illness that has had contact with the criminal justice system. However, in my job, as you can imagine, I see many individuals that come into court with a mental illness who are involved in the criminal justice system. And I think when I was a young prosecutor, first handling cases that had issues like that, I didn't really recognize the significance of the mental illness and how it played such a huge part in the acts that the individuals engaged in. And I think I was probably more focused on the victim of a particular crime than I was in really understanding what was going on with the individual that was charged with the crime. So the years that I have spent as a prosecutor have helped me to understand that significantly better. There's better education in our legal system among police officers, among prosecutors, among judges than there used to be about mental illness and the part that it plays. And what I have certainly learned is that when it comes to my attention that there's a case where an individual is not acting in a manner that we might think a reasonable person would act, but it seems like they're having a mental health crisis, that I need professionals to give me the opinion about that, and I need family members to give me individual information about the person that's charged with the crime, and we need to work on seeking solutions other than just locking them up. I've got a case that I'm handling right now where the individual several years ago committed an assault while she was high and also suffering a mental health crisis, and she did spend some time behind bars, and after she got released, she then has now recently committed another offense like that, and the defense attorney and I are working together to try to find a solution other than having her be locked up. She was just recently released while the case is pending to a facility that she could live in to get some help and see if she can manage that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
My mother has a significant mental health issue, and she always has. As a result of that, I had a very challenging childhood. So challenging, in fact, that my mother was involved multiple times with the criminal justice system because there were questions about whether my mother and my father could properly take care of myself and my 4 younger siblings. It was not easy. And what I learned and what I've continued to learn about the mental health issues in our country as a result of my experiences are, number one, it's really complicated, and there are not easy answers. Number two, these problems impact the whole family unit. They impact the teachers. They impact the family members who want to help. They impact the friends. They impact the friends' families. They impact the garbage man. I remember how many different people were involved when I was little and I was going through it with my mom. And the final thing that I learned was that even if you haven't gone through it, it's hard to understand it. I've had a lot of people over the years that have known my mom or that have heard about my mom that have offered advice or that have offered labels. And at the end of the day, those labels and that advice, what really families that are going through it, the individuals that are going through it want, is just someone to hear who they are and understand where they're coming from.
Thank you. Ron?
So yes, I have a nephew that's battled with mental health issues. Fortunately, he's stable. He's got a job, and he's doing well because he has all the supports he needs in the community. I think really my experience in mental health and how it interacts with law enforcement and the judicial system comes from my 28 years as a police officer. And when I started, we warehoused people in state hospitals. And through my career, we transitioned to a very positive interaction and getting people into the communities, but we didn't have enough resources. So we started warehousing them in prisons and jails. It's not where they belong. Not where they belong at all. I've had the duty of responding to suicides, to notification of parents whose children have committed suicide, and we need better resources. I am part of a committee, actually 2 committees that directly relate to this. I'm very pleased that I was selected to be on these committees. One is a work group with members of the Judicial Department, other attorneys, members of the mental health community. And the title of the group is really to decriminalize mental health issues and look at ways that we can keep people out of jails and out of prisons and get them into treatment. The other one is a task force on public safety, and it's a joint task force between Senate and House. We deal with pretrial stuff, but we also deal with justice reinvestment. And I was president of the Oregon Police Chiefs Association when we pushed the justice reinvestment program. Unfortunately, although we've reinvested dollars from that program, keeping people out of prison, we haven't invested enough in mental health and substance abuse treatment. So that's why I'm pleased to be on these committees, and I will continue to push those issues.
Thank you. Ken?
It's hard to talk about sometimes. I've shared this at NAMI meeting. I didn't do very well, but I had 2 cousins that suffered from schizophrenia, and one of them shot himself. I learned a lot as I watched my cousins change. Their mom started the NAMI chapter in Yolo County, Davis, California, where they live. It's called YAMI, and it's still going today. Although she started what they called halfway houses for people like her sons, my cousins that needed that help, and I went to sing-alongs at those shelters, which kind of kicks into my head this Ron was talking about that we used to warehouse them in hospitals and then we have them in prisons, and I think that's still often the case, but now we have them on the street. Chatting with Heather at Champion Team, she said that the overwhelming majority of people that she meets on the street have mental illness problems. Supportive transitional housing is the way to deal with them. If we don't do that, they will stay on the street. And again, I have ideas on how to do that. Got a great idea. Hope somebody asks me about it.
David?
Well, other than speaking for myself, and I've been very fortunate that the people in my family have not been afflicted anything more than anxiety. And I really feel for you, Ken, and the rest of the board here. When it comes to our criminal justice system, we have taken this punishment first, maybe because of the stigmatism that has been constantly inferred and educated, socialized into our young people from generation to generation. And it's a medieval kind of view that it's not a curable illness so much as, oh, I broke my arm. No one's stigmatized if you broke your arm, but you are if you say that I'm having trouble sleeping at night. You do if you say if I'm seeing shadows on the wall. You don't want to talk about that because you'll get stigmatized. We need to take the approach that it is just a medical condition, that these people have medical conditions that are just no more worse than having a problem with your liver. That way we can address and help these people. Why do I think it's, in my position as running for District 25, is because our government, our American government, was based on the state government being the fulcrum of the whole workings. This is not to say that counties and cities don't play their part and they're bad. But I'd like to continue later, so please ask me.
This next question is for our county commissioner candidates. Who would like to take the question first?
What's the question?
You're to remain silent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Since he came in late, I'll let him.
Already, okay. Casey, how do you define, quote, accountability, unquote, of the public systems which operate within Yamhill County? How do you define, quote, accountability, unquote, of the public systems which operate within Yamhill County?
So let's try this again. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Okay. So for me, accountability would be knowing that any one of you who wants to know what's happening knows exactly what's happening at any one moment. For me, as commissioner, what I'm going to do is take a picture at the end of every week of my calendar with who I met and where and when for every day, so that you know exactly who I'm talking to. And if I'm not talking to you, you know who. So you know who's influencing me. And then I'm going to make it very clear to you what is happening on every day. And then I've also been toying with the idea of actually setting up my office on the porch of the White House, because I feel like it's really important that each and every one of you recognizes that I'm actually working for you rather than the other way around. So those are some really tangible steps. You being engaged is me being accountable. And you knowing what's happening is me being accountable.
Thank you. Stan?
Yes. What I see to be accountability is actually seeing something happening within our county that's positive for our citizens. My responsibility as a Yamhill County Commissioner is to make certain that the things that we are responsible to do, and that's health and human services, our public works, our roads and bridges, our public safety, our sheriff's office, our county corrections, that we are operating to a standard that is not only recognized as high in quality, but we are in fact achieving what we set out to do when we set our programs in motion each year. We sit down and look at what are our objectives for this year and how are we meeting them. That's our accountability. You as citizens have put us there. You elected us to represent you, and I take that very seriously. When I'm in a position to make a decision, I try and look at how does this affect the general population? How does this affect all of the citizens of Yamhill County? I obviously have my leanings because of my political beliefs, and my religious beliefs. But the bottom line is, you elected me to represent you, and I'm accountable to doing that. And I think if you look at what we're providing in Yamhill County, the services, yes, we do have shortcomings. There isn't a political entity any place in the world that doesn't have its shortcomings. But you will not find anybody, any place that will give you more than I'm giving you each and every day that I'm serving you. And I do appreciate the opportunity to do it.
Thank you. Now for our two judicial candidates. Who would like to go first?
Lisa.
She's nodding.
I'll go.
Okay.
If you're asked there.
Such camaraderie. Okay, here we go. In a law and order environment where the pressure to spend more taxpayer money on punishment, prisons, and law enforcement personnel is overwhelming, how willing are you to stand up and advocate for shorter prison jail sentences and the diversion of more money towards housing and mental health treatment programs?
I think what needs to happen is the money needs to be channeled toward, if we're talking about prisons, the individuals that go to prison need to be the individuals that have committed the worst crimes. We need to be careful about sending individuals to prison who have committed lesser offenses than the most serious ones. And that would allow for funds to divert toward what I think will help many of our individuals with mental health issues, and that would be more housing that is monitored in a way that there can be someone there to help them to not walk away, to help them take their medication every day, to be watching over them to make sure they're making their mental health appointments, and that if they are involved in the criminal justice system, that they're making it to court when they need to go. I started talking in my last answer about this case that I have pending right now, where this individual she was released to a residential unit where there was someone that was there in the evenings, but not there all the time, and she ended up walking away from that and ending up back in jail then, because that was a violation of her release agreement when the court let her out while the case was pending. And so now we're in a position where the defense attorney is working to find another residential unit where she could go, where it would be more monitored, not necessarily a lockdown facility, but someplace where there would be someone there to help her, because sending her back to prison is not something that is going to help her. She was there before, and it doesn't help address what her underlying issue is, which is her mental health problem and her response to self-medicate with controlled substances. So it is really important in my mind to advocate, and especially as judges, we have the ability to advocate for things in the community that we think are important. And one of those would be to divert some of the funds from just sending people away to prison to the kind of residential facilities we need where individuals can get treatment.
Jennifer?
For the most part, I agree with Ms. Miller. The piece that I object to of the question is the idea of a judge as an advocate. I think judges do have an important voice, but I believe really strongly that judges aren't the ones that should be making policy in our state and our community. We need to be allowing that policy to be made by our lawmakers who are elected. The justice system only works properly to the extent that judges are looked at as neutral parties that aren't advocating for a particular position one way or the other. That having been said, I will tell you that when I think about the criminal justice system and the issues and the problems that we're facing, the question that keeps coming to my mind is our criminal justice system set up to be a system of punishment, or is it set up to be a system of public safety? A lot of times, public safety and punishment, the outcome is the same. In a lot of cases, public safety means you don't put low-level criminals in a prison setting where they're around other criminals. Sometimes public safety means that you focus on treatment options. As a judge, to the extent that I will have discretion from the bench. That's one of those debates that I'm going to be having in my own head. Because I live in this community and I have 4 boys growing up in this community, and the most important thing to me is that when I walk out the door, I'm safe, my boys are safe, my neighbors are safe, this community is safe. And so that to me is what that conversation really should be about.
Thank you very much. The next question is for our state representative candidates. Who would like to answer this? It's kind of a 3-part question. Who'd like to go first?
Well, because if we each answer one part of it.
The question's done. You just got to answer it. So I think, Ken, you are the first one to raise your hand. Is that correct? I think.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't see, but
all right. So listen to me carefully. What do you think of the performance of the coordinated care organizations funded under the state's Medicaid program? What would you like to see changed, if anything, in the upcoming 5-year renewal of the CCOs? And do you foresee a means for the state to continue the Medicaid expansion program, since this is vital to mental health care in our counties?
thanks for the question. How have CCOs done? Amazingly well. Getting off the ground, figuring out this new system and not dropping the ball. I think that's some things we worry about when our healthcare system changes. How's this going to work? And having gone to our local meetings and seeing the commitment of the professionals that are around the table, they've done very well. Now they're looking at CCO 2.0. The new contracts have been decided and they're coming out, and the folks in NAMI who are advocating for often their children that are suffering from mental challenges and themselves are holding their breath as to how that's going to affect them. This is the Medicaid part of it, and the federal funding and the state funding that comes to support them. And that's a lousy position to be in. the good position to be in is that we have health care for all Oregonians. In talking to Chris Brown, one of the great healthcare salespeople in our town, she said, we need single payer health care. And the money is there, folks. The money that we pay and the money that corporations are putting in to paying for health care, and if you have those people, those corporations that aren't putting that money into the health care, the money is there for health care for all Oregonians. That would take this question mark away from what's going to happen to our kids. And we would treat everyone that had mental illness in the way that they needed to be treated.
David?
Could you please repeat that?
Sure. What do you think of the performance of the coordinated care organizations funded under the state's Medicaid program? What would you like to see changed, if anything, in the upcoming 5-year renewal of the CCOs? Do you foresee a means for the state to continue the Medicaid expansion program, since this is vital to mental health care in our counties?
Well, it's certainly better than what we've had in the past. In the past, our services have been for mental care dismal and what I would call shameful. We need to expand even more our Medicare into Oregon Health into mental services as well. Like I've said before, I don't understand why there isn't a connection between regular medical care and mental care. It should be all in the same package. Funding for it, yeah. Every time we come around and with another election, the incumbents are who have been there, and you're trying to ask them, like this person here, what have they done? How have they funded it? And you get no answer back. Well, I would say first, stop giving the great big worldwide corporations a tax break, and let them pay their fair share like the rest of us. No one likes taxes, but we all want fair taxes. And it should go into our basic services such as health, and I would include mental health as a basic medical help.
Thank you. Ron?
So thank you. The CCOs in Yamhill, the CCO in Yamhill County actually performed fairly well. But CCOs statewide, really just average. When you look at everything else, we're pretty fortunate in Yamhill County. And as we get into CCO 2.0, I know that some of the issues really are mental health, school-based health, foster children, because there's not just one segment, it's really very broad in what the CCOs do. There's a financing problem. Do we need to continue to expand Medicaid? Absolutely. But 25% of the Oregon population right now is on Medicaid. So it's not without a price tag. That's part of the close to $1 billion deficit or shortfall we're facing as we enter the 2019 session. And we're gonna have to figure out a way to best prioritize to be able to fund what's really necessary. Not that what we do is not necessary, but we're gonna have to make some choices. What else did I miss in the question? I started to go off on a soapbox. I'm part of the Joint Task Force on Healthcare Cost Review, where we're dealing with these issues, looking at different states and what they're doing with Medicaid, excuse me. Part of the Joint Task Force on Pharmaceutical Price Transparency, excuse me. Again, to look at different ways to streamline that process. It's not a normal manufacturer, wholesaler to distributor process. It's very convoluted, and there's a lot of money going back and forth different directions that you're putting in pockets of people who do nothing but then take your money. So we're looking at that as well. It's a very large, big problem that if we put our minds to through CCOs, CCO 2.0, we can actually do some good work for people. I think we need to make sure healthcare, including mental health care, is accessible and affordable. And for people who can't afford it, we need to provide that.
Thank you. Danny?
Thank you. I would actually agree with most of what all three of the other gentlemen have said. CCOs in general have done fairly well in providing services, but there have been some letdowns and drawbacks, and in particularly the rural areas need a bit more emphasis, and that's one of the things I'd like to work on. Also, if we're talking about changes for CCO 2.0, and I know this is already being addressed, but questions about transparency and accountability and actual use of the monies that are coming into the system, so that they're not being used, as Ron said, to just pay somebody for not actually providing care. So those are some things that we need to address, but I like the concept of CCOs. As a veteran, I have VA care, and I go to the clinic in Salem, and it's almost a one-stop shop, and that makes a lot of sense in terms of reducing overall costs for everybody involved. Expansion of Medicare to cover that, and how we're going to fund it. We have to look at other funding sources to make this work. There are monies that are being spent already for care that doesn't happen. A lot of that's administrative overhead that it would be nice to reduce, if not eliminate. And we also start needing to look at our tax structure in general in Oregon, and take some of the burden off the middle class, who are paying 96% of the income taxes that go into our general fund, and maybe look at some of those corporations who are benefiting greatly from the work that Oregonians are doing for them, and have them help pay for some of the services that we know we need to provide.
Thank you. This question is addressed to all of the candidates. According to the Criminal Justice Commission, Yamhill County's recidivism rate, that's the percentage of former inmates rearrested within 3 years of release from prison to either parole, post-prison supervision, or probation. That number is in excess of 50%. What solutions can you offer to cut this rate in half? Who would like to tackle that question? Ron?
Other than the judges, I suppose I'm the next one.
I'll go, but no.
So, you know, we can talk about the one issue of people recommitting crimes, but it's really all tied together to a lot of different things. We have people who are addicted that don't have services, no intervention. We have people who have mental health issues that, again, go through this cycle. We have people that are just despondent and have nowhere to go. Housing, homelessness, all those things create this environment of really hopelessness, no light at the end of the tunnel, and we've got to start working together as a community. I think the solution really is private-public partnerships, similar to what Yamhill County does with Provoking Hope, Champion Team, and some others, that actually people get involved in the community to help each other in the community. There's some great, great nonprofits in this area. And I'm talking now from someone who sits at a table and listens to people talk to me about what's going on around the state. We have some jewels in this community in Yamhill County. And quite honestly, the Conservative Party says, I'd rather give my money to a nonprofit that's working with people on the street than to the state that's going to skim the top off of what comes back to the people on the street. But we need to encourage those nonprofits. We need to encourage the work that Juliet's House does with child abuse intervention. We need to encourage, again, Provoking Hope, Champion Team, See You Later Foundation, and Seeds of Hope. And that's just a few of the nonprofits and the community organizations that really make this place what it is, and that will solve that problem.
Jennifer?
Oh, that's yours. Come on. No, you go ahead.
Me next.
All right.
Can you repeat that question?
This is such a great question, by the way. It's so hopeful, and yeah, thank you for it.
According to the Criminal Justice Commission, Yamhill County's recidivism rate, that is, the percentage of former inmates rearrested within 3 years of release from prison to either parole, post-prison supervision, or probation, that number is in excess of 50%. So what solutions can you offer to cut this rate in half?
I hate to be a broken record, but I think that it's really important that we not look at our judges as policy advocates, but rather look at them as a piece of the puzzle. And with respect to that puzzle, I think that when people appear before a court, the judge should be really careful to not have labels in mind. It's not a bad guy versus a good guy, a criminal versus a victim. They're people. Because I think sometimes when you approach a person with your mind already made up or with a label already attached to them, it becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's what's so great about me not having worked directly as a prosecutor, not having worked directly as a criminal defense attorney. I have a diverse amount of experience that allows me to really be a little bit of a clean slate. And because of my upbringing, I don't believe in labels. I am trained as a civil attorney to see not a label in front of me, but people that need to be heard. And I think by giving people the opportunity to be more than their label, that actually is a huge piece of that overall puzzle.
Thank you. Liesl?
Thank you. So I had a really interesting discussion within the last couple of weeks with a retired judge from Beaverton Municipal Court who happens to be a Yamhill County resident. And one of his passions as a Beaverton Municipal judge was working with individuals and trying to help individuals who were repeat DUI offenders. And they started keeping statistics about, in particular, women repeat DUI offenders. And he said that in 100% of the cases where there were repeat DUI female offenders, they had had a trauma in their past. And that trauma could have been being a child of a divorce. It could have been being a child sex abuse victim or a domestic violence victim. But there was some trauma involved in their past that they were using alcohol or drugs to help treat, to help them survive on a day-to-day basis. And this retired judge and I talked at length about how in DUI cases, the treatment community that deals with the drug or alcohol problem doesn't really communicate with the treatment community that would address the underlying post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety disorder or whatever the result is of that trauma in their past. And it got me thinking about how great the likelihood seems that in the males that are back in court with repeat DUI offenses, they undoubtedly have had some trauma too, but are less likely to talk about it because of societal norms. And what I would like to see to help reduce recidivism is that the treatment community work more closely together with regard to the drug and alcohol issues and the underlying mental health issues so that we can help treat what really is the source of the problem and not just what we see with regard to the alcohol or the drugs. Thank you.
Okay. Stan?
One thing that we have going in Yamhill County is the fact that we work very, very closely. Our criminal justice system, our corrections facility, and our health and human services are very, very closely connected, and we connect as we connect them while they're in custody and keep that connection going when they leave. The recidivism rate you're talking about, over 50%, and I'm not certain where that number comes from or how it's being measured, because I know that because of the evidence-based decision-making that our people in corrections use, we are looked upon nationwide as an example of doing things the right way. So I'm not questioning the number. I would like to know the basis for it, because throwing a 50% number out there, I think there might be more underneath that than just a simple, we have this many people reoffending. If it is a DUI, I would be more concerned about criminal activity as opposed to something as a DUI, which is quite serious because it can result in death for themselves or others. But I do know that we are working very, very hard in Yamhill County to connect closely with our Health and Human Services to reduce recidivism, and I think we're doing a good job. Will we ever get to the point where we don't have it? When we stop having anybody commit crimes at all, then we'll get rid of that recidivism. But it's not just the problem with mental health issues or with alcohol and drugs. We have to take a look at our entire, well, and especially the time. We've got to give them a time.
Look at the time. That's not the one that's long enough. Okay. Can I stand up? It's passive sitting. Need to
Go for it.
move around. Okay. I'll lean forward. How about that, so we can all hear? Is it you and me, Ted?
Go ahead.
Are making the noise? Okay. What I would like to see us do in Yamhill County to reduce the recidivism rate is to do things like what Remnant Initiatives do, which is Terrell Taylor and Jody Hansen in Newburgh. They go to Oregon State prisons when people are getting ready to be released, who are coming to Yamhill County, and they literally take them, they walk them from the prison, and they go to the DMV, and they get them registered to vote, and they get them started on having their driver's license. And many people, I met a man who he'd been in for 17 years before he was eligible to vote, and he came out, and I met him the day he was out. He had just gotten a bicycle through this nonprofit based in Newburgh. He got a bike, he got registered to vote, he was signed up for his the driving part of his driving test, and he had just talked to a man about apprenticing doing Native American art. And he was so high in a really good way. And I feel like if we could take the money that is available and use it to do things like hold everybody's hand and guide them through the process of being like an adult in our community, we would cut the recidivism rate in half. But we can also take the justice reinvestment dollars that we have coming into the county and reallocate them for housing and for programs like Remnant Initiatives. So, and I'm happy to work with Lipstick to do that as commissioner. Thanks.
Danny?
Oh, thanks. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm looking down the line here, and there's an awful lot of education. And I don't think any folks here are recidivists.
I've gone back to college.
I don't think anybody here has. So that my point being that I think education has to be involved, and I think that education that's getting our students through high school so they can get into a job or get into further education so they can get into a job plays a big part in keeping them from getting into the criminal justice system in the first place. But if they are in, what are the causes, and then what causes them to repeat offend? And quite often that's no plan for success when they have done the time that they are supposed to have done. So we need to make sure that we've established plans for success for folks who are coming out of prison or jail or some other criminal justice requirement that they've had, so that they can succeed. And I think the things Casey talked about, making sure that essentially holding their hand until they get to that point where they can get started is a very good way to go. There's some other things too that we need to look at, things like mandatory sentencing and how valuable that really is, and how that could actually add to the problem of recidivism. So there are a lot of different things. There's the community public-private partnerships are great, and everything we can do to create a path for success for anyone who's coming out of prison is a great idea. One of the things, I'm in the Lions Club in Independence, and they have a eyeglass program at Coffee Creek, and the women that are involved in that are actually offered jobs as they come out.
David?
Well, as I see it and know about it, one of our problems regarding that recidivism is that, like it's already been said, is there's no counseling and there's really no hope or help after you get out. It's, you know, you're released like a fish back into the wild. We know that actually a counseling system does work because they do it in Germany. Over in Germany, they when somebody's been prosecuted, incarcerated, and then released, they have almost a lifelong counseling. It's not a parole officer, it's somebody who helps them find a home, find a job. Because that's part of the problem. You might be, you served your time, and, but who's gonna hire you? I knew a fellow long ago, and he would get picked up for a misdemeanor, a low-grade misdemeanor. Got his day in court, would be fined, time served, he'd be released. And then, of course, the fine isn't a cheap one. And he has no job that really pays for him to be able to have food and housing and pay for that. So he pays for his fine for 3 months, and then he stops paying for it, and, well, they're not going to go after him. What they do is they put out a bench warrant for him. So he gets pulled over a year or two later with this bench warrant out, and so he's back into the system again, and it goes round and around and around. I agree with Ron. We should have possibly a government and charity mix response, and that would provide counseling and job, and make sure these people are back onto the path, the narrow and right path. Hey, I made it in time.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
I'd like to spend a few seconds echoing what Danny said about what I call going upstream. When he talked about education, one of the nonprofits that operates here in town and around the county, A Family Place, is a beautiful example of that. Also, what I've already mentioned, pre-kindergarten is going upstream of those problems. When a young child, 3 or 4, is able to get support to have themselves be ready to go through school at that age, the success rate with children that come from homes with difficulties is much, much higher. Now, when someone gets out of jail here in town, Provoking Hope sends them a postcard and invites them. And Provoking Hope holds car washes to support their activities. Heather at Champion Team, she's holding that together with her will. Here's an idea. Again, supportive transitional housing at many levels that help these people that come out of prison and meet them where they need to be. Howie, for years, has been advocating a Compass Center. Here's an idea how to pay for it. When you book a room, it costs about $4 a night to shelter someone. You book a room for $200, you're on vacation, there's a button there that says $4 to shelter someone for a night. The legislature can incentivize that. They can help perhaps have grant programs with that income stream. It could be a public-private partnership that it would be a private firm that collected this money and the revenue streams came to local and regional housing centers. So it's that kind of we have to think outside the box. We're not getting it. The counties and the cities are stuck with this problem. And the state has been slow to step up. And I will be in there, if elected, helping the state step up.
Thank you. Our last formal question, and it's a question for all of you. We're going to ask each candidate. You now have the opportunity to ask one question of your opponent. So, who would like to go first?
Me?
That's fine.
Do you want to answer for him too?
Please do.
David, go ahead. Start it off.
We might actually finally get an answer. I would like to know that someone who says that he believes in community, but yet separates people that are in the community. I was shocked the most when last year Bill Post on his radio show said that he thought the whole reason behind gun violence was the devil made them do it. He literally said Satan was causing evil, and this was part of it. And I found that the most shocking. I'm glad I was driving down the road at the time and I didn't crash my car. But I found it so shocking. This kind of mentality is part of our problem. This is what keeps us from solving our problem. Because they're not willing to look outside their little box. And we need to look outside the box occasionally in order to find the solutions that will get our people better and have better lives.
Thank you. Bill Post, do you have a response? Okay, let's go down to Danny. Same thing?
Yes, Mr. Neerman, a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned at another forum that you didn't appreciate being called a bigot and a white supremacist. What I would like to ask you is, in knowing that we are usually judged by the company we keep, why do you have an association with an organization that's been identified as a hate group if these are not these are not your feelings? That's the question I'd like to ask. I've got a second one.
Well, we did say one question. One question. Thank you. Who'd like to go? Stan or Casey?
How much time do I have for my question?
You will ask a very succinct question.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking about the examples that have been provided. That's all. I was about to call you Stan. I'm sorry. Commissioner Primozic, can you tell us about your childhood? See, that was a short one.
Thank you.
Yes, I was a very blessed child. I had parents who loved me dearly. Grew up started out in Sydney, Montana. Went during the war to Renton, Washington. My mother was a Rosie the Riveter. Then went to Billings, Montana for several years until a serious car accident caused my father to sell his business, and we moved to San Fernando, California. From San Fernando, California, we moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where I graduated from high school and had a wonderful experience there. Now that was my childhood. You didn't ask for my adulthood, and I went through most of that with everybody. But so I'm a very blessed young man.
Do you have a question for Casey?
Sure. Do you have a question for Casey?
Is that your question? He said you only get one.
I just, knowing, having read all of the material, Casey, I just was curious as to the things that you've done, the services that you've been involved with that have prepared you to run for the seat of Yamhill County Commissioner.
It's like I get to do that introduction that I was not here for.
I gave you that opportunity.
I know. That was going to be my closing. What am I going to do for my closing? Okay, thank you for accommodating my meta conversation. So I was raised at the beach. I went to my undergraduate studies were at Western Washington University. I have a biochemistry undergraduate degree, and I worked in a protein biochemistry lab. I also worked as a plumber while I was in college. The university hired me as a plumber's assistant, and I got a union wage. It was the most amazing thing ever for a college student. I got married at the same time, and so we felt like we were rich, and it's all relative. But and I continued working as a plumber after graduating from college. We lived in the mountains in the North Cascades, and I was the plumber for a small community. And then we went back to Bellingham, Washington, and I got my master's in forest ecology there. And at the same time, we were both working on a certified organic farm outside of town. And I love the graduate school experience of being it's sheer persistence. All you have to do is do it. There's nobody who's pushing you along. It's self-motivated all the way. But at the same time, I was in a computer lab, and I was like looking at microscopes counting tree rings, and the farming was so much fun. And so we moved here in 2006 and started our farm, a certified organic vegetable and tree fruit farm. We own land on Grand Island, which is the most amazing place to grow anything. Lots of water, lots of soil. Thank you. I have 30 seconds. What more should I say? I'm a farmer, I'm a scientist, and I'm a rural resident. And we really need that on the Board of Commissioners these days. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Thank you. For the judicial candidates, in order for the moderator to remain completely neutral or impartial, Jennifer, pick heads or tails?
Heads.
Would you pick? Just flip it up and see what it comes out as. It's heads. You go first.
Okay. Ms. Miller, during the campaign, you have emphasized your criminal law experience, and you've done that even though we have 3 judges already on the bench who have extensive criminal law experience. When I look at the judges that we have throughout our state, I think there's between 150 and 200 of them. There are a large portion of those judges that have very similar experience to the experience that I have that haven't practiced criminal law prior to getting on the bench. My question for you is it your position that those judges with experience similar to mine are not qualified to be on the bench?
No, I would not say that's my position. I think part of it is the number of years of practicing as a lawyer, that I've been doing it for 25 years, and I've done both civil and criminal law that I think makes a difference as far as qualifications for judge. I also think that one reason that there are, in this county and others, a large number of judges that have criminal prosecution experience is because as a prosecutor, I'm ethically tasked to accomplish justice in a case. It isn't just about going in and being an advocate and trying to win a case. It's about, and just advocating one side. It's about considering what are the victim's wishes in a case? What are the treatment needs of the defendant? What is it that will help keep the community safe? It's about looking at all aspects of that rather than just being an advocate for one side. And most lawyers, when they come into court in a civil case or representing a business or whatever their case is, their job in court is to get the best result they can for their client. And that's a bit of a different focus than a prosecutor who's tasked overall with accomplishing justice. And that's why I think individuals that have that criminal law background as a prosecutor can transition easily into being a judge.
Would you ask your question of your opponent?
Ms. Chapman, given the fact that you don't reside in, that you reside in Yamhill County, but you don't work here primarily, your office is in Salem, how do you think that's going to affect your ability for a smooth transition onto the bench without already being integrated into a number of our community resources and knowing already the people at Juliet's house or at Henderson House or at the other community partners that we see regularly that the judges will call upon in cases?
I will begin by challenging the premise of the question. I may not have my employer's office here in Yamhill County, but I represent a lot of employees who work in Yamhill County. I have represented the employees who work for the Yamhill County Employees Association. I've represented the employees who work for Yamhill County Housing Authority, the City of Newburgh employees. There are a lot of employees that I have worked with, that I regularly work with. I have a lot of friends who are attorneys in this community, and frankly, I've been in this community for 14 years. I go to PTA meetings. I've personally had to access services for myself, for my family, for my friends. I've had people come to me and say, hey, I've got this crisis, what do I do? That comes from living and residing in the community. That having been said, the fact that I have worked outside of Yamhill County, or at least that my employer's office is based out of Yamhill County, is actually a really big blessing for this community in some ways, because you want a judge. The community desperately needs a judge who does not walk into a case with a preconceived notion of a witness's credibility, that does not walk into a situation with apparent sides. Even if you're not biased, the appearance of impropriety is dangerous to the justice system. And in many ways, I am the definition of a neutral, because I haven't already taken an advocate's side in a case. And I think that's really, really important. So I think it's actually going to be a smoother transition. I think there's going to be fewer conflicts that we have to worry about. Thankfully, my friends don't tend to go to court as often. But I think it's actually going to be a really big blessing and something that the community can benefit from.
Thank you. For our last representatives, can we do the same flipping of the coin? Ron, what do you want, heads or tails?
Tails.
Tails it is, go ahead.
Well, this is a little bit awkward, but you can do it, so I think I can do it. Ken, we had a fairly high-profile election 2 years ago, and then also you ran in 2014. I'm just curious, really, the time to file for an election, to file for a seat, starts in September and goes for about 6 months. So I assume you're very familiar with the filing deadlines and stuff because you've been through it before. I'm curious as to why you waited, why you didn't file, and why you waited to file, because you had a chance to watch my record, watch my voting record, watch how I interact at the state. Wonder if you could answer that question for me.
So we did have quite a contest, and I was done. And then you sent out a postcard to all the Democrats asking them to write your name in on their ballot so that you would have the Democratic and the Republican nomination. And the Democrats came to me and said, we'd like to have you be our candidate for a write-in campaign so that we do not suffer this humility. We are a swing district. I'm going to hold on to that. We are not a red district. And I was not going to let that happen, so I said yes. And then winning the write-in campaign, then there was a decision. What am I going to do now? Do I resign? Ron won't have you won't, this is a question to you, you won't have the Democratic nomination. How did he do? Because frankly, I was done and I wasn't paying attention. But at that point, I did pay attention and I did my homework. And that's why I said in my opening remarks that Ron is a very conservative voter. The ones that riled me up was his vote against closing the boyfriend loophole. That's the one that got my attention. That the federal government allows guns to be removed from spouses that are abusive, but not domestic partners. And so that was up to the state to close that loop. And you voted no. And you also voted no to remove guns from those that are of imminent risk of suicide. And that riled me up. And that passed, thank God.
Thank you. Now it's your turn to ask a question of Ron.
All right. More in my homework. That was it on the gun safety. But the other one that caught my eye was your vote on House Bill 4111. I'll just read it. Describes fees required when a person is applying to replace or renew current driver's license with Real ID compliant driver's license, or is applying for a new original driver's license that is Real ID compliant. Now, translated, that means House Bill 4111 allows current DACA recipients and those with temporary protected status who have existing driver's licenses to renew those licenses while Congress debates how to move forward. This would allow DMV to issue limited-term 2-year driver's license to DACA recipients whose DACA protections have expired because of some decision of some man in Washington, D.C., and already have a driver's license or permit. That was a vote of 36 to 22, and that riled me up. That DACA-protected people, you voted not to allow them to renew their driver's license. So how did that happen?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. That particular bill also increased fees. My vote was actually not to increase the fees for renewing driver's licenses, especially when it comes to the ID requirements of the federal government. We're behind. We're on a extended grace period, and if we voted to raise fees, everybody who wants an ID compatible to be able to fly is going to pay a whole lot more money. So DACA is an issue. We have people to take care of. I wish DACA provided an avenue for citizenship, and I think it should have. And the federal government's going to work on its immigration issues. I appreciate the question. I wish you would have asked what I think about Measure 105, because Measure 105 should be defeated. And I don't think people believe that I would actually say that, but Measure 105 should be defeated. The law works perfectly well the way it is. I've had a chance to operate within those bounds for 30 years. Gun votes, because it got brought up, and I think I have a little bit of time. 4145, the boyfriend loophole. The interesting thing about passing, well, in a long session, thousands of bills, in the short session, a couple hundred bills within 35 days, is during an election year, sometimes bills are created to divide us. This one did, absolutely. In Oregon, it's always been against the law for someone convicted of domestic violence, for someone who has a restraining order, which, by the way, you have to be related by blood, you have to be cohabitating, or an intimate partner, boyfriend. So that's always been in Oregon law, to not, they can't have firearms or ammunition. So this particular bill was labeled boyfriend loophole. Federal government, as Ken Moore stated, does have a boyfriend loophole, or the federal law does. Oregon never has. The other thing that the law added was stalking convictions. Now, I've issued a lot of stalking protective orders. I'm sure there have been stalking convictions, but in my 28 years in 2 different jurisdictions, I'm not aware of one person being actually convicted for stalking. Again, that's my awareness. I'm sure it's happened, but it wasn't enough to push me to the point of infringing upon a United States and Oregon constitutional right. If we're going to change that, we need to change it at the constitutional level. And I wish Senate Bill 19, my colleague Brian Boquist's bill, would have had something to address mental health issues as opposed to just taking property without due process. If it would have had something to address the underlying issue regarding mental health, treatment, and crisis intervention, it would have been a little bit more appealing to me.
Thank you, candidates. We now have a series of questions from the audience. Maybe we can move through these with, say, 1.5 minutes per question. David, can you program your phone to take those? And We'll go for 15 minutes. That'll have kept you up at the table for about an hour and 45 minutes. I understand that's a very long time, but let's try to get through these. The first one is to state representative and commissioner candidates. The mental health system in Oregon is unnecessarily complex and expensive. What will you do to make the system easier to navigate? Danny, let's start with you.
He has a booming voice, though.
This is true. I can talk without the mic. Could you just reiterate the question for
The
me?
mental health system in Oregon is unnecessarily complex and expensive. What will you do to make the system easier to navigate?
Well, first off, try to make it not as unnecessarily complex. There's a broadness to that question. I really think that at the legislative level, we can look to align services amongst the counties and the cities so that those complexities that are there are reduced. And one of the ways to do that is investing a bit more in the technology that links those providers and the systems that are out there. There's a lot of complexity to a lot of things we do. Sometimes it's very necessary. Sometimes it's necessary for the protection of those involved. But I do think there's a point where we can utilize things that we already know work to reduce the complexity and the cost.
Thank you. Stan?
I think part of that answer came out of Danny. We need to localize our services. We can do a much better job at a local level than trying to manage the state-mandated methodology that we use. And consequently, they throw these rules at us, and we're so tied up in trying to make sure we meet all of the criteria, we spend a significant amount of the resources given to us to do that rather than actually provide the services. We are working very hard. DHS is a broken system, and we have been working hard, I say the Yamhill County Commissioners, but Mary Starrett especially, in driving that to the local level, and we are very, very close now to being able to funnel the work that DHS has been doing with foster children through a program that was mentioned earlier, Safe Families, that is operated out of Lutheran Family Services. It is going to take a tremendous amount of the complexity out of that program and actually protect our children in Yamhill County. So we can do things. It's taken a long time to get to the point where they're allowing us to do that, but we're going to use that as it's kind of a springboard to continue to eat away at those state programs that really do not function well and bring them into the county.
Thank you. Casey?
One thing I learned recently is that when you say that something is broken that we all value, it's a way of providing the vulnerability to dismantle it. So when you say Social Security is broken or PERS is broken, that is language so that you can reach around and start taking it apart piece by piece. And so I just want to be careful about how we use language. But one thing I would like to do to make the system more effective is to bring mental health counselors and therapists, medical professionals directly to the people who need them, rather than forcing people to come to an office at a given time and be there in the right place at the right time. And I really feel like that's a great way to make things really effective and also really personal. When somebody comes to you, it's so much more valuable. And it recognizes and respects the individual. So that's my one thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ron?
Thank you. There was talk earlier about our CCOs, which really is a statewide Oregon Health Authority responsibility administered at the local level to fit the local communities. In 2017, I actually introduced House Bill 3250, which provides block grants to specified counties for a 2-year period to assume duties of DHS and OHA and housing with respect to mental health, developmental disability services, alcoholism, substance abuse, and treatment services, child welfare, and on and on. It didn't go anywhere, but the commissioner mentioned some current work being done, and what he actually started to introduce for me was a bill that I submitted to Legislative Council last week. I've been working on with Seamus at the CCO, with Silas at Human Services, and the Board of Commissioners to actually create a similar pilot project for child welfare. And you know, I don't know that child welfare is broken, but it sure needs some work. And one idea we have is to create a pilot program that allows DHS the same responsibility as OHA with the CCOs, but allows the community who know the needs of our foster system and our homeless children, and working together with our CCO to provide appropriate medical services for those children. The other thing that has been brought up that I think I would just mention is House Bill 3063, which I was a co-sponsor of also, requires Housing and Community Services to work with the Oregon Health Authority to disperse monies for housing and mental health fund development for community-based housing, crisis intervention, rental subsidies, and other housing-related services. So we're really all on the same, we understand the issue, working together, understanding different perspectives, different points of views. We can actually provide some solutions. We're a bit ways off, and it's going to take some work with me and the legislature to try to form those alliances to get these bills passed.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's right, the phone went off. My story.
Ken?
I didn't hear it either.
The speaker didn't say be quiet.
I'll give you most of my time. I liked what you said. I think that bringing, and what Casey said, of bringing this complexity closer is a good idea. And I think that, like Ron said, that the DHS, there's some work to do there. There is a new director, and we're hoping that that will make a difference. It's a large bureaucracy, but I think, again, bringing it down to the people that have hands-on is a way to pass those problems out and make that bureaucracy smaller.
David?
Well, what can I say but ditto, 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 ditto. No, but actually, to make it, first of all, any service has got to be community-oriented. Even if it's a state-funded, it has to be community-oriented. But yeah, there is problems with anything that gets too complex, too bureaucratized. I mean, look at a college. You go to a college and you have to go to this office and this office and this office and that office. How about something a little bit closer to one-stop shopping? We have, you know, it's a concept in our business world. Why can't we do something like that in our medical services? Just a thought.
The next question is for our two judicial candidates. If you would go ahead, Jerry, and flip this coin. Lisa, what do you want, heads or tails?
Tails.
It's heads. Jennifer, there have been some highly controversial endorsements. How will they shape the way you will handle yourself and your decisions on the bench?
I'm not sure exactly what that question is referencing, but I will tell you that I have avoided getting the endorsements of particularly controversial political figures. I believe very, very strongly that politics need to stay out of our judiciary, and for that reason, I've been careful in seeking the endorsements of high-ranking political officials, especially those that have been controversial. I've done that in part because of the politics, and frankly in part because I consider myself a candidate for the common people. And the endorsements of the common people are the ones that mean the most to me. I'd rather have an endorsement from a teacher, a janitor, a nurse, a doctor, than someone that might turn off part of the population. I think that in order for our system to work, we need the populace to believe that the next judge will be fair and will be impartial. And it's hard to do that when you get controversial political endorsements.
Thank you. Liesl?
Yes, thank you. So in order to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, I have declined to accept donations from special interests or organizations that could appear to have some influence over me as a judge. I think that it's very important to avoid that, and so that is what I have done to avoid that.
Thank you very much. Next question. I think this is for everyone. If Measure 105 passes, which makes Oregon no longer a sanctuary state, how do you plan to help and treat individuals such as children who will be experiencing trauma as their parents become detained and deported? Who wants to tackle that? Casey?
Sweet! I shouldn't be excited about this, but I totally am. The question, that is. I have proposed that, so Lutheran Community Services has a legal immigration legal services program within it. And I have proposed that the county fully fund improving the legal status of every resident of Yamhill County who wants it. And I feel like that will go a long ways towards easing the fear of children in our community who worry about whether their parents are going to be there when they get home at night. It also has an economic basis because every person who has improved status is that much more secure and that much more committed to our county. But that's the primary thing that I intend to do if Measure 105 passes. And I don't want Measure 105 to pass, and I don't think it's going to, and I really appreciate other public officials doing that, stepping up for it.
Anyone else care to respond to the question? Ron?
I think I already voiced my opinion about 105. Underlying, I've never been authorized in my 30 years of law enforcement to enforce federal law, and federal officers have no authority to enforce state law. Arizona, if you remember, not too long ago tried to do that, and they were overruled. The idea of sanctuary is really a misnomer. There's no such thing as committing a crime and then crossing over a line somewhere and saying, I'm free. It doesn't happen. So we're so polarized with this that we've got this on the ballot now. The reality is, if it passes, people are going to be afraid. I had a young 4-year-old in Corvallis kidnapped. 4 years old, wrapped in duct tape for $400. Both of the individuals, well, the parents, were undocumented. And they were too afraid to come forward to report it. We found out actually through the grapevine and a news reporter who did some digging who did it. We found the child, we arrested the individual and deported them because they were also undocumented. And what I found out from a relative of another case who was a homicide detective in Phoenix is that it's very, very common that crimes go unreported within the community because they don't know if they walk into the police department, if they're going to walk out. That's a federal issue, and the federal law is broken. We need to fix it. Here's an example how broken it is. My daughter married a young man from Dublin on June 1st. They spent the summer with us and moved to Ireland 2 weeks ago. She's been there a week. On Monday, she had an appointment with immigration. She waited 4 hours because it was busy. They had an interview. She went back out in the waiting room, waited 20 minutes, got called up and said, yep, you're a resident, you can go to work. Cost her $0. My employee at Linfield, 10 years, $17,000 for his wife to become a resident. Not a citizen yet, just a resident. The system's broken. If 105 passes, we have people who are going to be traumatized.
Anyone else care to answer that question? Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, of course, I'm against Measure 105. It's framed as sanctuary. I'd like to reframe that as it's continuing to have the anti-profiling law in place. So if people come with you at sanctuary as a place for people to hide, no, this was an anti-profiling law. That's why it was passed. If it does pass, there was a measure passed by the legislature last session, HB 3255, with a vote of 36 to 23, that with this change, non-legal citizens will not be automatically deportable for conviction at a low-level misdemeanor offense. This was to encourage to stop profiling, preventing through training, data collection, increased accountability. It requires data collection for all pedestrians at traffic stops, regular training. So this bill did pass. If Measure 105 passes, then this will help be a stopgap to that. This law has huge impacts on non-legal citizens who risk being torn apart from their families for low-level, nonviolent misdemeanors. And that was passed along party lines.
Thank you. This question is for both judicial candidates. What is your general philosophy on handling first-time criminal offenders? Who wants to take that?
Well, I can go. It's difficult to say that I would have a policy in place with regard to being a judge, but certainly as a prosecutor, there are a number of policies that are in place that I know of from the district attorney's office, and that is that we have, and the law allows for diversion programs where an individual would complete whatever sort of treatment or perhaps some community service as a punishment in advance of getting convicted. And if they successfully complete that diversion, then the case is going to get dismissed. And there are a number of, there's an early resolution program to help resolve cases quicker. There are, as have been mentioned, the evidence-based decision-making implemented in our county, which allows for assessment of individuals and what their needs are as far as treatment and how safe they are in the community, and those are helpful to address what to do with first-time offenders to help them avoid either getting a conviction at all or getting an appropriate sentence. What a judge can do with regard to those things is always keep that in mind in issuing a sentence, is how we don't want to send a first-time offender, if we can help it, to jail or prison, where they will become a worse offender than they were to begin with. We always need to be keeping that in mind. Thank you.
Sure. Jennifer?
I agree with Ms. Miller on a lot of the answer. It's difficult to say that a judge has a philosophy on a first-time offender. I think what the public needs to understand is that the way that the law is currently written, a lot of the power for making decisions in some of these cases lies in the prosecutor's office. The law really ties a judge's hands with respect to a lot of the decisions that are made. A lot of these criminal cases are pled out and come before the court on negotiated sentences or ranges of sentences. A lot depends on how the prosecutor has chosen to charge the crime. There's a lot of different variables. I believe strongly in the evidence-based decision-making practices, so that to the extent that as a judge I would have discretion, I would exercise that discretion with that philosophy of what is in the public's safety. Most importantly, I think I would just tell you that everybody screws up now and then, and I would see anybody in my courtroom as a person first.
Thank you. Next question, what is your position on homelessness? Anyone care to answer?
I think it's a crime. But it's a fact of the world we live in today. There are a number of reasons for homelessness, and we're not going to solve them at any level individually. This is a multi-jurisdictional problem, and we need to work together for solutions. In McMinnville, Newburgh, it's becoming quite horrible, but nowhere near the problem they have in the city of San Francisco, which scares the heck out of me when I was visiting there not too long ago. But homelessness stems from a number of issues. One of the things we have to do is have a more vibrant economic base. We need to have jobs, and those jobs have to pay a wage that will help people to get a place to live and to continue to be able to afford that place to live. there are three things that are critical to economic development, and that's transportation. That's why I work so hard on the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. Workforce development, which is essential, and I am the chair of the Jobs Council for the Willamette Workforce Partnership, because that's an essential piece. And education, working closely with our schools, and having my 24 years on the school board, I have made some really good connections and have a good relationship with our educators. It is absolutely essential that we take care of some of these problems, but it's not a one answer problem.
Anyone else care to respond? Go down here to Danny.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree that it is a very complex, it's multi-jurisdictional, I'd also say it's multi-generational. And so the avenues to deal with it are also going to have to come from all over. And partnerships need to be made, cities, states, counties, and nonprofits, coordinated plans. The education piece, as Stan mentioned, is huge, and it's a big factor in where people end up in life for their personal education, but also the education of others. And the aspect of being able to have a job that pays you a living wage and allows you that dignity that you should have as a human being, and then allows you to move forward in life and hopefully build a place to live, a community within the community, is something we all need to strive for. I'm very much in favor of things like raising the minimum wage so that folks can actually pay for housing in some of the areas we live in where it's very expensive, and also so that folks can have a lot more portability in terms of where they are at.
Who else?
I stood up, so I get to do it next, right? Is that true?
Well, we'll think about it. Go ahead.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm going to take the initiative here. I think that there's a simple solution, which is to get people in houses. It's like less or more, like house full or house less. And so I think that the county and the small cities within the county need to get together and say, okay, I have this amount of money that I'm going to put into the pot, and I'm going to have this amount of money that I'm going to put into the pot, and then together we can go, okay, do we build houses? Do we buy land and put a trailer park? Like, what do we do now that we've got this money from all of us? But I think we need to have people in houses. That's simple. Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been raising my hand. Sorry. I feel like the kid in the corner. And
Ron's had his hand up too.
We'll come around.
He was standing up with a shadow they couldn't see.
We're on the same question. It's just we're coming around.
Well, one of the things that isn't being addressed, it was addressed in the last legislative session, was to remove the statewide ban on rent control. There is a statewide ban instituted by our state legislature that says that our cities and counties cannot put in rent control. Now, I think that's a bit arrogant of legislators to do that, because why would somebody from Bend, who is in the legislature, be able to tell McMinnville here whether or not they can have rent control? It should be that decision. I'm not advocating it or otherwise. I'm just saying that decision should be local. That's one of the first things that I would do to help address this, because let's look at the rent in the urban areas. It's been going up constantly. People move here. Well, our economy has been growing, maybe not by leaps and bounds all the time, but it has been. But look at the rent. Rent has gone from $400, $500, $900, and in some places I saw it jump in 1 year from $900 to $1,300.
Thank you. Ken, did you have a comment?
Yes.
I had a kickoff event, and the young woman that came to pour wine what just surprised me because she was really engaged, and afterwards she shared with me that I lived in a tent with my mother, and that was because she couldn't get into a shelter because she had a drug addiction, so my sister and I lived in a tent. So this is the term high bar and low bar shelters. We have several high bar shelters we have high bar shelters in town, high bar beds, meaning you have to be clean. So the people that aren't, I step over them on First Street when I go down picking up litter with Sal Peralta, just because we get out together and get to know the community better. And so these people need that supportive transitional housing that I talked about. And like I said, the counties are stuck. The state needs to address it. I have other revenue ideas to address that, but again, I want to tell you about the creative public-private partnerships that are available to actually have a supportive transitional center right here in this town and in towns all over the state. And that's the goal that I won't lose sight of, that I won't look away from homelessness.
Ron?
This one will be shorter. Thank you for bringing that up, Ken. Because what I was going to say is that the last numbers I heard is up to 49% of our homeless in Oregon are either addicted or suffer from a mental illness. It brings us right back to the very first question. We need to provide resources. We have them in town, and I think you probably figured out that Ken and I are on the same page with regard to providing transitional housing. It's a bill that I sponsored. But we also have to think about, even though there's a nexus at some point, homelessness with what we see in mental illness and addiction is really different in some respects to affordable housing. And that's going to take a workforce development, that's going to take looking at land use issues, protecting our land, but also looking at ways to increase the supply of housing. It's going to take an infusion of dollars from the state to deal with EHA and SHAP, the Emergency Housing Assistance. It's going to take a concerted effort. It's going to take some time with economic development and all that to come together. But we can't let people fall through the cracks. We need to deal with the addiction, the mental illness, and then people who don't have a place, a roof over their head. We need to provide a solution today while we wait for the supply to increase.
Any one of the other candidates care to answer the homelessness question? Okay, well, I think what we're going to do is conclude our meeting this evening. But before we go, I'd like to have all the NAMI members stand up who are responsible for putting this program on tonight, and let's give them a really nice round of applause. Again, we should all thank our citizens here who are running for public office and the hours they're putting in, and their ability to endure the very direct questions they get from us all the time. But we thank you for your citizenship and your willingness to run for office. Let's give them a real nice round of applause. We have this room until 9 o'clock. There's 15 more questions that we just did not have time to answer. But if any of you in the audience would like to come up and I'm sure spend a few minutes with one or more of the candidates, if you're willing to stay on, that's fine.
Oh, yes, please.
We understand it if you have to leave. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.